Good afternoon, everyone. As the rest of you are trickling in, I'm just going to go ahead and introduce you to our speaker of the day, Mr. Johan de Wit. Johan de Wit works for Siemens Smart Infrastructure, Technical Officer Enterprise Security, and is involved in global Siemens portfolio development. He owns a master's degree in security science and holds a PhD in holds a PhD research position at Delft Technical University, where he is exploring the characteristics of security risk assessments. He is a member of various expert communities and advisory boards like the Dutch National Cybersecurity Center, ACIS, Information Security Forum, Overseas Security Advisory Board, OSAC, and he is a regular speaker at conferences and universities and publishes papers and articles. Today, he will be giving a lecture on cybersecurity of operational technology. So without further ado, Mr. de Wit, the digital floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you very much for the nice introduction. Well, actually, the PhD research position last week, I defended my my thesis. So ever since last week, I'm actually a doctor now. So it's no longer a research position.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So a kind of new doctor in the house now. So thank you very much. I have a lot to discuss, and my lecture will be about operational technology, and I will explain later on what it is. But I would like to first go back to some of the basics of why are we discussing even cybersecurity and why that is important. So let me take one step back and share a few words on digitalization more in general. And this is a definition from the European Union, and it more or less is about we connect everything to everything. And obviously, this seems obvious, but it really means that we are now connecting the physical and the digital world in making one environment. And we actually making these kind of cyber physical systems, and that has a lot of upsides to that, but also some downsides. And I would like to refer to a research or paper from a research institution for the Dutch government. It is also available in English, by the way, called Digital Disruptions. It's a paper from 2019. And the Dutch government asked these researchers to give some kind of outlook on what a digital disruption would mean for society. And it's pretty disturbing. Although it's 5 years old, it's still very valid work. And what they state more or less is that our society as a whole is very much depending on digital systems. And without these digital systems, our society will stop. And the second thing has to do with these cyber physical systems. The complexity of our society, our systems, and our processes is increasing. And it's very hard to get an overview of what would mean if something fails, what would happen in other domains, because it's so interconnected that it's very hard to get a holistic view on that. Besides that, and I made the word safety in green, I come back to that. Safety is at stake as well. It's not only information that might be not available or might be not up to date. It can also lead to safety issues. And that's something that we come back to in a second. In 2019, they already foresaw that these kind of digital disruptions would get a geopolitical side. And ever since we have seen certain conflicts in the world. Of course, we have Russia, Ukraine. We have a lot of issues in the Middle East, and we see that it affects the digital abilities of societies. So it will be a part of geopolitical tensions and geopolitical threats to these kind of systems. And final statement from this report is that it's not a question if these systems will be compromised. It's more the question when they will be compromised. And they raised a few topics which will come back to them during this presentation, during this lecture. So what can we do about it? So how can we prevent digital disruption? What circumstances for retaliation? That's not something I'm going to address. That's something more on a government perspective. And what an appropriate response could be as well. So even though attribution might be difficult in a cyber attack, there must be some way of retribution or retaliation to it. Some other reports. In the Netherlands, we have Cybersecurity Build Netherlands. So every year, the National Cybersecurity Center brings out a report on the status of cybersecurity and cyber threats. Also available in English. You can find it on the website of the Dutch National Cybersecurity Center. And this is a quote from the report in 2015. And I really like it too. It's not that long ago. They state that society comes to a standstill if digital systems fail and there are no analog alternatives available. Now in 2019, same report, so 4 years later, the government concluded there are no analog alternatives. So our society is completely depending on digital systems to function. And if the digital systems break or malfunction, then society stops. It's simple as that. So we seem to have a problem with digital systems, and what are we going to do about it? And I will come back to this question in a second. Let me first introduce myself. As said in the beginning of the introduction, my name is Johan de Wit, working for Siemens Smart Infrastructure. I'm heading the portfolio management group for the region EMEA. So we're looking at systems and solutions for mainly physical security systems like your video surveillance systems, access control, control rooms, alarm receiving centers, things like that. That's what our business is about. And as I said, we have this combination, the cyber digital systems. So we have not only the physical security part, it's highly linked to cybersecurity nowadays. So you cannot really differentiate between them. They become one. So we need a holistic approach on that. And that's what we do within Siemens as well. Work for Siemens over 25 years, looking at various things. You see the topics and the mega trends that we focus on within Siemens. And I'm part of various organizations from government, expert groups, and business associations. A few words on Siemens. Siemens is no longer only one Siemens entity, so there are multiple ones. We have Siemens Healthineers. They do the medical equipment in hospitals. We have Siemens Energy building power plants. And we have, of course, the Siemens Core. And the Siemens Core consists out of 3 units. We have the digital industries, as we call it. They develop automation systems, so usually called PLCs, PLC systems that are used for any automation out there. It could be anything from an entire power plant to just the elevator in your building. On the right side, you see Siemens Mobility, also very active in Africa. So we do train systems, highway systems, etc. And in the middle, you see my group, Smart Infrastructure. We supply system solutions, products, and services for smart buildings. And smart buildings combined with smart grids make smart cities. That's what we do in Smart Infrastructure. And as said, my part of it is mainly the physical and cybersecurity portfolio that we deliver. Just to give you an idea, this is the size of the organization, my part of the organization. So over 70,000 employees, and we do 14 billion, more or less. just to share some words on that. That's a little bit about my background. Okay, I started off with a problem. The problem that society nowadays is very depending on digital systems, digital developments. So what are we going to do about it? And I will refer to mainly to the European part, as European is big in legislation on this topic, and that started in 2013 with the cybersecurity strategy for the European Union. And you see a lot of familiar topics that are covered in this cybersecurity strategy. And a lot of them, ever since 2013, we have set up a lot of acts and regulations since then that are applicable to the European Union. But what we saw is that a lot of these regulations are kind of spread worldwide. And you see in 2016, the GDPR, it's probably familiar because a lot of organizations took it up, especially the global corporate ones. If they need to comply to the GDPR in Europe, they might as well do that for the entire world. And we see that with more regulation that is meant to be for Europe only, but it's taken into account in other regions, so probably in your region as well. You see this whole list of different regulations that came up in Europe, and I will cover the two latest. So the Cyber Resilience Act and the NIS2 directive. I will briefly touch upon those. And let's start with the NIS2. So the NIS, the Network and Information Systems Directive. The first NIS was launched in 2016. When the European Union launches these regulations, then the member states usually get 1 to 1.5 years to translate that into local or national regulations. So that was done in 2018 for the Netherlands. In 2023, so January 2023, an update of the NIS is launched, so the NIS2, that will be effective this year in October. So all the member states in the European need to have the legislation implemented by then. Now, what is it about? It is about the critical infrastructure mainly, focusing on critical infrastructure. And if you look at critical infrastructure nowadays, and it will not be very different in South Africa than it is in Europe, the largest part of the critical infrastructure, national critical infrastructure, is in private hands. So if you look at the financial sector, it's completely private. The energy sector, oil and gas, is usually private. Telecommunications, data centers, networks are private. So the whole food sector is private business. So a lot of these critical infrastructure elements are not owned by the government anymore. But society is depending on them. That's where I started off with in this lecture. So if the government wants to make sure that society keeps running, they have to regulate these private organizations and make sure that they do their best to keep their production safe. Not to save these organizations, but to save society, to make sure that the processes for society are resilient to cyber threats. So that's the main goal of the NIS2. Now, in 2016, the NIS was launched, and we are now in the second version, and you can see that the scope of what critical infrastructure actually is expanded quite a bit, and expanded to almost all the sectors. So it's applicable to a lot of organizations in these sectors that you can see on the slide. What does it do? Further apart from the scope, there are the cyber capabilities that need to be enhanced. So there's more. The organizations are expected to do more to get cyber resilient. There's more international cooperation between all the different countries. So there's information sharing on threats and vulnerabilities between the national cybersecurity centers. And third, there's more focus on managing the cyber risks. And in the orange box are two things that I want to stress. The first on the left is supply chain. Supply chain is a core component of the NIS2, meaning that organizations not only have to make their own systems safe, but have to make sure that their suppliers and the suppliers of their suppliers have cybersecurity on top of the agenda as well. So the entire supply chain must be secure. Now imagine that you are a big bank in South Africa and you use data centers, or you use Microsoft Azure cloud applications. Then you have to make sure that these suppliers do something on cybersecurity. Now, in the case of Microsoft, that's obviously the case. But Microsoft, in turn, has other subcontractors or suppliers of them for networks, etc. So you have to make sure that as a member of these critical infrastructure sectors, that your entire supply chain is secure as well, and that will mean quite a bit. So you cannot just transfer your responsibilities to your suppliers. So, well, that's their task. No, you have to make sure that they do their task well. Second part in the orange box is an interesting one. In the NIS2, the management of organizations will be held accountable for cybersecurity implementation of cybersecurity measures, and that's something new. And we don't know how that will evolve, but as we know, especially if you work in the security or cybersecurity domain, then it's always the question of how much do we invest as an organization in cybersecurity, and what do we get back from that? Usually, management needs to decide on that. Now, making management accountable for that makes probably a lot easier to get your budget to take action, because if the budget restrictions are too tight from management, they might be held accountable that they didn't do enough to secure their business. So there are two interesting elements that are kind of new to our business. So beside all the, let's say, technical nitty-gritty of cybersecurity, what it usually is, we need to make sure that that our supply chain is compliant, and that our management is completely involved in that as well. So it will be part of the entire business processes. Now, I've added one slide. These are the kind of the basics that the NIS2 will require from organizations, but as I assume that you are kind of familiar with cybersecurity, so these are kind of basic elements that any organization should do if you do anything on cybersecurity. So don't go much deeper into that. Probably there are some other lectures where other lecturers will tell you more about these. Okay. Now, this lecture is about OT. I will explain OT in a minute. What we see is that what we're going to discuss is the difference between IT and OT and how they interact with each other. So what is OT actually? OT stands for operational technology. So on one side we have IT, information technology, and on the other side we have OT, operational technology. And that comes back to kind of the development in physical automation systems. And what you see in the industry 4.0 is the cyber physical system. So we kind of intertwined the automation and the IT world, and that's what happens. So if you look at OT systems, they usually have all kind of sensors and actuators in the field. So the field devices, you have controller level, where you connect all your field devices to a controller, and then these controllers communicate to each other, so peer-to-peer, but they also can communicate to kind of server levels and then you end up in the more IT world. So what we've seen over the years and over the last decades, to be honest, is that these OT systems are completely integrated in IT environments. On the other side, IT environments are not completely suitable for OT systems either, and I will come back to that in a second. Now, this terminology, operational technology, is something encompassing a lot of other definitions that are out there. So things like industrial control systems or industrial and automation control systems, etc. So there's a lot of names for these kind of systems. So in the marketplace, we try to make a new one, which is operational technology, which will encompass it all these other systems. And these kind of OT systems and these elements, these automation systems, like take for instance a train. For instance, a train is an OT system with a lot of sensors and automation to make it drive and to make it communicate to the railway safety systems. That is an example of OT. Of course, we have IT connected there as well, and that's the growing significance of this configuration of IT and OT. You cannot really differentiate them. Now let's focus a little bit on the differences between IT and OT. I hope you're all familiar with the basic concept of IT security by now. So these, when we discuss IT security, then we mainly discuss the three elements, the three topics of security. So the availability of information, the integrity of information, and the confidentiality of information. That's usually what we need to take into account when we secure information or information systems. Now, in OT systems, there's a fourth element to be added to these three, and that's safety. OT systems, they have an impact, a physical impact on the environment. So if you take again the train as an OT system, the train needs to drive, but it needs to stop. It has emergency stops. It has to stop in time. So there's a safety element there as well. Or take, for example, the automation of a bridge opening and closing. Then you have all kinds of automation systems to make sure that opening and closing of a bridge is controlled, and that you have traffic lights stopping the traffic before it opens, etc. So things like that have a safety component to it. And that's something that IT doesn't necessarily have, at least not a direct safety element. In OT world, we do have a safety element, and that's often the most important element of an OT system as well. It's not so much about confidentiality of information. If you talk, for instance, about a bridge, open and close, the system controlling that, it doesn't necessarily have to be confidential, but the safety part is a crucial one. There are a few more differences between IT and OT, and I've listed a few. If you look at IT systems, we usually have a lifespan of 3 to 5 years. So hardware, software is even shorter. You regularly need to update and patch. The availability, of course, it should be available. And as you experience in Africa, some internet outage, then you start to know that availability is a thing, but no one dies if it's not available for 5 minutes. Real time, not necessarily. You can have some delays or latency. Physical security, usually the physical security of IT systems is pretty high. So we all know that the data centers where the IT environment is housed in are pretty good secured usually. Patching is done, antivirus is kind of standard, security testing and audits are standard. So a lot of these things are established policies. Now, if you look at OT systems, it's a different story. OT systems usually have a lifespan of 20 to 25, even 30 years. So if any government or railway buys a train, it doesn't run like in an IT system. It should run for more than 3 to 5 years. It should run for over 20 years. And all these kind of OT systems or industrial production plants or your energy grid, it all should last long. Meaning that the install base that we currently have is pretty old. It can be from previous century, and it's not necessarily built or designed with the security measures that we nowadays would need in mind. So a lot of these systems are simply not capable of fulfilling all the security requirements that we would have for a new system that will be sold today. The availability is extremely high. So if you open or close a bridge, for instance, and there's something wrong and you need to hit the emergency stop button, it must stop immediately. There's no delay accepted. So a OT system usually has low latency and it must function all the time, 24/7. And that's the difference between IT and OT. That's the major one, I would say. Physical security is, well, it's less, because these kind of OT systems and the sensors and the actuators and the controllers, they are spread over a very distributed location. So it could be your bridge where you have a technical room. It could be a factory or a production plant where these elements and these controllers are spread all over the buildings in technical rooms, but also on behind the ceilings, etc. So they could be literally anywhere. And a lot of these components are not completely secure or not installed securely, as they are spread everywhere. So the physical security side, or the approachability of these kind of components, it's pretty high usually. You can easily access them. In my domain, for instance, take a video surveillance systems. The video surveillance system has cameras usually on the outside of your building as well, meaning that your network is on the outside of the building, or even on your perimeter, so at your fence. So that makes it vulnerable for physical attacks. You can physically attack, or you can have physically access the network, for instance. So it's a completely different from an IT system. These kind of systems are not patched regularly often. It might be difficult to patch them, by the way, because of this safety element. So take, for instance, a power plant, and say that you would like to patch or upgrade the software of the automation systems in your power plant. Then usually if you change anything to a system like that in a power plant, then you need to test it from beginning to end 100%. So you have to make sure that all the sensors and all the systems, all the processes function perfectly fine, and they need to be tested thoroughly. That means that if you want to do an upgrade, you have to stop your power plant, do the upgrade, do an end-to-end 100% test, and then bring it back on, which will take months. So instead of doing an upgrade on your phone where you just accept and next and it's upgraded, for things like a power plant or a train or a bridge or whatever, it takes much more effort. You cannot simply run an update and then it's done. You usually need to test everything. So you need to make sure that all the safety features are still functioning like they should. So this OT world, so cybersecurity in OT world is not, it's not usually not common practice. And I refer to a research 2015, almost 10 years old, which kind of points out that these IT and OT are usually different domains. There are different departments in organizations. You have your IT department, often outsourcing with cloud-based technology. And the OT system, so usually your production systems, they are somewhere in your regular organization. So the two different entities. Now the people in the organization doing a process, running a factory, or for instance, they don't necessarily see OT as a digital system. They just, well, I'm not buying an OT system, I'm buying a train, right? I'm driving a train, and that's a train. It's not an OT system or not a digital system. Of course, they're wrong, but that's still in their mind. So you have to convince them that they have to look a little bit different at their systems. The ICS people, therefore, don't really look at cybersecurity issues or vulnerabilities or something. That's not something that they are raised with, so they're not familiar with it, and they usually don't pay much attention to it. On the other hand, the IT people are very risk aware. They follow all the vulnerabilities and the threats that are out there. They patch and update and monitor their systems. They have all kind of scanners and virus scanners and malware scanners there. They have processes in place to mitigate risks, but they usually not aware about what an OT system is doing, or what an OT system makes it particular or different from IT. The things I just mentioned. That's something not in the head of an IT manager. They just think that if I want to have a patch on Microsoft, I would just run the patch and bring it back up again. Well, that's something that you cannot easily do in an OT system. So, and they don't really understand that. Now, this is 2015. This is very much still the case. I experience this day to day, that these two different worlds, they do not really understand each other. Sometimes they don't want to cooperate because they are two different kingdoms. So there's a lot of friction between them. Who's in charge and who can make the decisions on these systems? So there's still different entities. This kind of reflects that. So industrial control systems, OT systems, could be anything. They have different names, but they also have my systems are building systems like HVAC and security systems. They are OT systems as well. And to make sure, I talked to banks in the past, and when I talked to a bank about their industrial control systems, ICS systems, the bank said, well, I'm not industry, so I don't have industrial control systems. I'm a bank. And of course, they're wrong, because the majority of the banks had some kind of data centers. At least at the time, they had data centers themselves. And a data center is consisting of OT systems. So the energy management in the data center, the cooling and ventilation is an OT system. So you might protect your IT systems, but if I would be able to switch off your the cooling of your data center, then it will go down anyway. So you need to look at these kind of OT systems as well and protect them to make sure that your business stays running. Here you see the same. So the OT systems are usually most often not a part of the security policies of organizations. So there's an IT security policy, but OT is usually not a part of it. The IT department doesn't have a good overview. Often the OT department doesn't have a good overview either, as these systems exist for 20 plus years and they change all the time. So people organizations add different components, add new components to the older system. So to keep a good view on your installed base, what is exactly installed in my factory, for example, what kind of versions or what kind of firmware is installed in my factory, what kind of operational technology, OS systems are installed, what kind of database do I use. Usually for an OT system, it's a lot of organizations don't really know what they have. these kind of systems, OT systems, are usually installed by all kinds of subcontractors, like system integrators or installers who just put in new stuff or bolt on new elements. So it's very hard to get a good overview of what is actually the status of the installed systems. And with that, if you don't know what you have, then obviously you don't know what kind of risk you're running. So, OT systems. Don't see any questions. Any questions so far?
We're currently looking through them, Johan, but not any at the moment that we'll ask you.
Okay, great. Great. And time-wise, I'm good, I think, yeah. So how do we secure OT systems? Obviously, you have learned probably a lot already about IT systems, but I want to look at some of the protection of OT systems. Well, the obvious one, this is the one that we take into account at Siemens. You have the site security, which is kind of your physical defense, network security in the system itself, the obvious ones. And then, of course, you have people, process, and technology. I assume that you are all aware of these kind of basic elements of cybersecurity. What we have for OT, I see I see a few hands raised now. Is that correct?
Yeah, we see some people with their hands raised indeed. The problem is we cannot unmute them. So we would like to ask everyone, if you have a question, please drop it in the Q&A box, and we can then ask it to Johan de Wit later.
Great. Okay, then I will just continue. So if you if we look at OT systems, there's a new regulation that came up, or a framework, maybe the better word, for securing OT systems, the IEC 62443, and that's a global standard for the security of OT systems. Now, it's a lot of elements, so I don't go through it in detail, but there are some interesting elements there. And first, if you look at the scope of the IEC, then there's two general ones. So the chapter 1 and chapter 2 are kind of the general one, or the cybersecurity things, I would say. But then it's interesting. It encompasses end users, so the users of OT systems of a factory. It encompasses the installers, or system integrators of these kind of systems, and also suppliers of the components of these systems. So this framework focuses on all the entire chain, from the end user to the installer to the supplier of the components, and all have their parts of this norm. And obviously, if you want to make a secure system, you need secure components, but you need also someone who installs it secure and sets all the security controls in place, put them in place, and then you have the end user that should use it in a secure way, so changing passwords, etc. So what I really like about this framework is that it covers all these different elements. So for all of depending on where you work, if you're an end user or in a system integrator or a supplier of systems, this framework has norms that will apply to you. Second thing, which I think is very interesting as well, is that the IEC has 4 security levels. Now you can imagine that, let's say, the HVAC system in a school or in an office building is not something on a high priority. So if it would fail, then of course you wouldn't feel comfortable, but it doesn't kill someone. So in the HVAC system in, for instance, an office building might be security level 1. On the other hand, an HVAC system in a data center might be security level 4, because the HVAC system in a data center is crucial for the process. Same counts for hospitals where you have these intensive care units or operation centers where the temperature is very critical. So depending on where the system is or how it's used and what the impact is if it fails, you can set these different security levels. And depending on where you set your security level, so you do some kind of risk assessment. That's part of the IEC as well, a risk assessment of your systems, and thus the impact and likelihood kind of estimations that you do. Based on that, you set the security level. And based on the security level that you set for a certain system, a certain OT system, and you have more or less security controls to put in place. So I really like this kind of gradual mix. So it's not a one size fits all. You can adjust it to your needs. Now, if we look at just one slide on what we do with Siemens, we adopted the IEC 62443, and a lot of our competitors do that as well. And these are two processes that we follow at Siemens. These are Siemens' main core processes. One is developing products. That's the top one, where we have this development process, and of course we have in the end we have the maintenance of the products that we have. The second one is as a system integrator. So the first process that we have is kind of supply. We are supplying components. The second one is the system integration part, where we build an entire solution. Now, as said, in OT systems, the final arrows in this are as long that they wouldn't fit my screen, because these are 20 to 30 years long. So everything that we sell today will probably be somewhere in place the next 30 years. So we have to make sure that we can maintain it. Given these processes, the IEC has all kinds of elements, a whole framework, as said, where we implemented all these, all that framework in the different phases of our organization. That means, in fact, that our entire organization is dealing with it. So in our case, OT security is not something that we bolted on, so we added a few people and then that's it. No, it's really a part of every process of every person in the Siemens organization, which are, as you saw in the beginning, in my case, over 70,000 people in only my department. So they all are trained, they all know what the IEC would mean for their work, or because they only usually do a part of the process. And to take everything into account, we have, of course, a governance organization. We are a big corporate organization. We have a lot of people who are making sure that these processes are properly implemented in Siemens. Just some example. I know that some other big organizations are doing something similar, but it could mean that if you work for an organization in the critical infrastructure, that you apply this to your own organization, but also to your suppliers. And then I come to the final part of my lecture. As mentioned, the NIS2 is kind of on the demand side, so a lot of organizations will need to comply to the NIS2, and a part of it is the supply chain. So you have to make sure that your supplier is complying to cybersecurity regulations as well, which could, for instance, be the IEC. So if you buy an automation system in the market as an end user, then you have to make sure that your supplier complies to some kind of standard or framework. And there's some legislation coming up also in the European Union, but again, as said, this will have impact probably far beyond the borders of the European Union, and that's called the Cyber Resilience Act. That will come into play 2026. It's already gratified in the European Union, but it will be translated now into into national legislation. And the Cyber Resilience Act is about digital hard and software. So it's about components with a digital element, as they stated in their definition. And this Cyber Resilience Act, the CRA, is focusing on manufacturers. And what you saw on my previous slide, so the IEC is kind of the framework, what you can use to comply to the CRA. It will mean that suppliers need to have a process in place for security by design. So from the start of your development of any process, components or software, you have to start with security. It's not something that you add during the process. It must be a part of that process. You have to have a process in place to document all vulnerabilities. You have to report if you find any vulnerabilities. So that's very important. You saw some in the NIS2. You saw this item on cooperation. These vulnerabilities need to be reported to your national government in the case of the European Union, and the national government will make sure that it's communicated to other national governments. So the vulnerability is known throughout the domain. You have to maintain the system, so it's not a hit and run sales. You have to give the right instructions, also including cybersecurity measures. Usually they are left out. So things like changing your password is not something that's in the user manual, or there's a basic standard password there. You don't have to change it. So that's a pretty basic example of what will change with this Cyber Resilience Act. And you need to be able to patch it during the life cycle. So in our case, if the life cycle is 20 to 30 years, then we have to make sure that we have soft and firmware updates available throughout the life cycle of our components. The Cyber Resilience Act will focus on, or will be split in 3 different areas. So on the left side, the default category, which is kind of the basic stuff, probably the business to consumer kind of components. For that part, which is assumed to be the biggest part, the supplier needs to test and maintain it themselves, and they just need to tell the governing body that they comply. The critical parts, so critical class 1 and critical class 2, probably the classes where, in my case, the Siemens components will be in. So we think at Siemens that we will only be in class 1 and class 2. We don't have the default category. Then you either test them yourself, or in class 2 you need to have your components or your hardware and your software tested by a third party. And in Siemens we already do that both. So we have our own department doing pen testing on all our products, but we also have external pen testers to test their systems on vulnerabilities. So for us, it doesn't change that much, but for a lot of organizations, it will change. Coming back to the NIS2, the critical infrastructure, or organizations, end users in the critical infrastructure will need to make sure with the NIS2 that their supply chain is secure. And they will probably refer to the CRA framework. And to comply to the CRA framework, we as OT supplier, we can use the IEC 62443. Now some examples, what they supply is, you can see them, different examples, what would be in every class. So this is something that is coming up. Okay, time-wise, almost at the end. Good. A brief summary. And I took this slide from KPMG advisory, because I think it's a very nice overview of how these these different the different regulations and frameworks, how they can be combined. At first, you see the ISO 27000, that's mainly focusing on IT systems, and you see the IEC 62443, probably new to you, but that's focusing on OT systems. And as said, these two are kind of combined. So probably as an organization, you need to comply to both, and especially where the IT and OT are intertwined, because OT systems use IT components as well. You need to comply to both, probably, or you can use them both to comply. Then you have the Cyber Resilience Act that will focus on the supply side. So the suppliers and integrators that need to comply to the Cyber Resilience Act. And you have the NIS2, who will be more on the demand side. So with that, I think that we kind of have a established holistic approach to both IT security and OT security, and security from the demand side, but all the way through to the supply side. Good. Final slide. What I would like to bring to the table, or what I would like you to take home, is that next to IT security, there will be IT compliance as well. And I hope that by now you got the idea that it's not only about IT, but it's also about OT. OT is in all the organizations, wherever you work. OT is everywhere, but it's usually not a part of the IT security frameworks that are in place. So just make sure that you have OT in your focus as well. That's it. I would like to thank you for your attention. Also for those who will watch the recording later on. Thank you very much. And if there are any questions, please put them in the Q&A box and then we can answer them. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Johan. That was a very interesting lecture, and we have quite some questions in the chat now. They've been popping up over the past few minutes. I will start with this one. How can operational technology and information technology collaborate to minimize risks and enhance business success?
That's probably the million-dollar question. That's something that, like I showed the research from 2015, that there are two different departments. The bigger organizations, at least what I see, they are trying to merge their departments. So the OT and IT departments try to bring them together, so they have some kind of common approach and they can learn from each other. So the IT departments usually have a lot of knowledge about IT security controls, vulnerabilities, etc. The OT departments do not really have that, so IT can bring that to OT. On the other side, the OT department is the automation systems are pretty peculiar to an IT department, so they have to explain to an IT department what's different. So bringing them together, or at least making them work together, that's the biggest challenge that a lot of organizations worked for on the last couple of years as the awareness for OT security grew. So it's getting people together, make them, let them talk together. It sounds very obvious, but it's something that's not always done.
Yeah, thank you for that, Johan. Indeed, sometimes it's the simplest things, but make the biggest difference. And we have another, I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions, 2 or 3. We'll see what we can do. We have one here. COVID has shown us that the traditional OT systems are difficult to update. And the question is that with the recent attacks on OT systems, what is the best way of integrating OT systems with IT?
Ooh. I would say 2 questions in one. I explained already that patching or upgrading OT systems might be difficult depending on the circumstances that you're in due to testing. So a lot of organizations still try to minimize the upgrades. So don't do every single patch in their OT environment simply because they cannot manage that. You cannot stop a production plant for a month to upgrade and test it. So what they try to do is isolate the OT environment as much as possible, making network segments and separate them, so that if there is a vulnerability inside an OT system, they know it, but they can try to isolate it and disconnect it from the outside world, so the exploit cannot be used. So they're two different worlds, and it's kind of balancing risk versus the effort it takes to upgrade.
Great, thank you for your response, Johan. We have another question. Where was it? Here. How possible is it to check all levels of security of our supply chain for compliance? Bit of an open-ended.
That's a good question as well. We actually do not know how deep that will go. For instance, if there's an end user buying something from Siemens, then obviously Siemens uses components from others as well to make our components. So we use software components, but we also use hardware components, and we don't actually know how deep that will go. Obviously, probably it will not be possible to go to the end of the supply chain, because then you will have all the different electronic components, for instance, that you combine into print boards, etc. So that's something that we don't know, and even the regulator doesn't know exactly. So what they stated, that the end customer finally is responsible, but how far this responsibility will go and how deep they can look into the supply chain is something that will have to learn, and probably there will be some court cases needed to get that clarified.
Great, thanks, Johan. We have a couple more questions here. We have one saying, are legacy systems regarded as OT systems when they are no longer supported? This might be an easy one to answer.
They are, yeah.
Okay.
They are, yeah.
Great, that one must have been throughout. And then we have, what is the difference between NIS2 and NIST?
The NIST. NIST is a different framework. NIST is a framework from the US, and there's a lot of overlap, to be honest, between the different regulations. We as Siemens are member of the Information Security Forum, and I'm not sure about the participants, but if your organization is a member of the Information Security Forum, they have an overview. They made a standard of good practice where they combine the NIST, the NIST, but also others like SOX regulations, the ISO, the IEC, because a lot of these regulations have overlap. They more or less have the same kind of elements. And if you are a big organization, then you probably have to comply to all of them at some point. And it is a hassle to have them combined. Now, the Information Security Forum offers the a holistic approach where they combine all the regulations into one in the standard of good practice. And if you follow the standard of good practice, then you have the ISO, the NIST, the SOX, all kind of combined. It can be a hassle. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Thank you, Johan. Thank you for your time. Thank you for all your answers. In the interest of everyone else's time, I think we should leave it here. So just want to thank you again for this lecture and for all of your insights and for teaching. We see lots of hands giving you a round of applause. I hope you can see them as well. Yeah, thank you again very much. We will be making this video recording available online in the course of the next week. And we will see you in the next lecture, which is going to start in a few minutes. So once again, thank you, Johan, for your time.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.